We're on the record. Good morning. Welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission's rulemaking proceeding in docket number RM73. This is with respect to proposed modifications to change the eligibility requirements for the Universal Service Protection Program, otherwise known as the USPP. We'll begin this morning by taking appearances, beginning with Commission staff.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. I am Catherine Mackerlane, Assistant Staff Counsel on behalf of staff. Also representing technical staff this morning is Ms. Anna Joy Harris, Regulatory Economist on behalf of staff. RM73 is a rulemaking to consider revisions to the Code of the Maryland Regulations 20.31.05.08 proposed by staff and the MEP/USPP Working Group. Hereafter working group.
Thank you. Ms. McElwain, we'll take appearances from the other parties and then we'll turn it over to you. We'll now turn to Office of People's Counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Jacob Auslander on behalf of the Maryland Office of People's Counsel.
Good morning. We'll turn to the utilities next, starting with Representative for Potomac Edison.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Jeffrey Trout, Counsel to Potomac Edison.
We'll turn to Counsel for PHI.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Matthew Seegers appearing for Pepco and Delmarva Power. Also appearing with me is Ms. Danielle Wright, Senior Business Program Manager for PHI.
We'll turn to Counsel for Baltimore Gas and Electric.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Christy Ravenel on behalf of BGE. And along with me, I have David Kahn, Energy Assistance Program Manager.
Washington Gas Light Company.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. This is Robert Kane from Washington Gas Light Company.
Good morning. Are there any other participants that wish to make an appearance this morning? Ms. Mackerlane, back to you.
Thank you. I believe we have a presentation. Right, in one moment, I'm just trying to pull up the PowerPoint. I spoke with Ms. Best about pulling, thank you. I think I must have done it, but I see it now. Thank you. We can move to slide 3, please. Thank you. So here we are today to discuss RM73, a rulemaking to consider revisions to the Code of Maryland Regulations 20.31.05.08 proposed by staff and the MEP/USP Working Group. Today, pursuant to Commission Order number 89637, issued on September 22nd, 2020. Staff and the working group continued discussions on revisions to the Code of Maryland Regulations 20.31.05.08C. Staff's proposal of revised regulations and data requests was submitted on behalf of staff and the working group on December 31st, 2019. A public comment period was held open until February 1st, 2021. Next slide, please. Staff and the working group proposed to permanently eliminate the waiver requirement of COMAR 20.31.05.08C3, which requires a waiver for the purpose of paying down arrears program after the participant's first year of USP participation. First-time USPP applicants may choose to apply all or part of their MEP benefits to arrearages in order to qualify for USPP, but this is a one-time election. Currently, COMAR does not allow MEP grant funds to be used to pay down a customer's arrearages after the first year. In addition, customers with arrearages of over $400 are not allowed to enroll in USPP. Next slide, please. The proposed revisions to COMA enable USPP participants to apply the MEEP grant to arrearages for USPP participation and eliminate the first applicant limitation. The revisions also eliminate the inefficient administrative process of utilities requesting waivers of COMAR to enable them to use MEEP grant funds to pay down customers' arrearages in order in USPP. The work group unanimously recommends making this permanent rule change and agrees with staff's proposal. Additionally, Potomac Edison, on behalf of PE, Baltimore Gas Electric Company, Potomac Electric Power Company, Delmarva Power and Light Company, Washington Gas and Light Company, and Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, collectively the utilities, filed comments supporting staff's proposed rule changes during the public comment period. Allowing energy assistance agencies, utilities, and customers the flexibility to use MEEP funds to retire arrearages so as to avoid service terminations and facilitate service restorations aligns with the intent of COMAR to provide energy assistance. Paying down arrearages upfront is an effective mechanism to reduce a customer's net bill. Considering the facts that utilities request the MEEP grant waiver for the purpose of enabling their customers to enroll in USPP, staff and stakeholders have reached a consensus to request that MEEP grant funds may be applied to arrears in a lump sum. The work group did not reach a consensus on the issue of application of the remainder of the MEEP grant to customers' bills after the MEEP grant applied in a lump sum to the arrearages. The work group determined that this issue requires further work group discussions to reach a consensus. Another issue the group did not reach consensus on is the language of election in COMAR 20.31.05.08C3, which requires an even monthly payment plan for MEEP monies other than payment for arrears. If the Commission grants the permanent waiver, it is likely that more customers will be able to participate in USPP, which is intended to offer winter protections from terminations due to non-payment and to assist customers by establishing equal monthly payment plans over the year. If the Commission were to deny the waiver request, customers would still have access to funds to pay future bills, but would need to find funds from other resources to reduce their arrearage amount for USPP participation. Staff is willing to support the permanent arrearage restriction waiver in exchange for the utilities answering standard data requests about the application of the MEEP grant to arrearages. And at this point, I'll hand the floor over to Ms. Harris to discuss staff's data request. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. I'm Anna Joy Harris, Regulatory Economist on behalf of staff. Staff worked with the companies to develop this data request. Using the data collected from the company's responses, staff will be able to measure metrics such as total MEEP funding provided to the companies, the total number of MEEP customers, the number of MEEP customers who hold an arrearage, the number of customers who enroll in MEEP for more than 1 year in a row, and the percentage of MEEP customers who are also enrolled in USPP. By collecting this data on an annual basis, staff will be able to analyze trends, establish correlations between metrics, such as the methodology used by the company to distribute the grant to customers, and the number of MEEP customers who hold an arrearage, and gain insight into how to better help customers in the MEEP program. Next slide, please. Staff's data request contains 10 questions. Each question serves a clear and unique purpose that, when answered over multiple years in conjunction with the other questions, will allow staff to discern trends and correlations. A copy of staff's data request is available in Exhibit Number 2 of the brief filed by the working group on December 31st, 2020. DR questions 1 and 2 lay the foundational metrics for each year's data. Question 1 collects information on the amount of MEEP funding received by the companies, as well as any other funding the companies received and the month in which this funding was received. Question 2 collects data on the number of customers enrolled in the MEEP program that year. These two data metrics help to set the scope of the program and show changes over time. Next slide. DR questions 3 through 6 examine the program on the customer level by focusing on customer-specific metrics. Question 3 gathers information on the value of MEEP grants distributed by poverty level and by fuel type. This data is requested to be broken down into specific dollar categories, giving insight into where the MEAP funds are being distributed and providing direction as to where the demand for the grant lies. Question 4 collects data on the number of MEAP customers who hold an arrearage. By looking at the change in data over time, we can determine if the number of MEAP customers with an arrearage is increasing or decreasing, which may be indicative of the success of the MEAP program in preventing the reaccumulation of arrears. Next slide. Question 5 asks how many MEAP customers hold an arrearage that is greater than the amount of MEAP funding they receive. This tells us how many MEAP customers there are who, if they apply their entire MEAP grant to their arrearage, will still hold an arrearage. This data is broken down by the same categories used in question 3. Question 6 collects information on how many repeat MEAP customers there are year to year. In other words, how many of the customers who enrolled in the MEAP program in the present year were also enrolled in the MEAP program in the prior year. Next slide. Questions 7 and 8 dive into the specifics of customer arrearages with the aim of better understanding the scale of customer arrearages and the proportion of MEAP grants that are going towards paying down individuals' arrears. In question 7, the threshold of $400 is based on the eligibility for admittance into USPP, which the working group is proposing to eliminate. And the threshold of $1,000 is assumed to be an outlier, which the data will either confirm or deny. Question 8 seeks to discover how much of any individual MEAP grant is going towards paying down arrearages and how much is going towards paying bills. Next slide. Finally, question 9 collects data on how many MEAP customers there are that are also enrolled in USPP, and question 10 gathers details on how these individual companies are applying the MEAP grants to customer accounts. During working group meetings, it was revealed that the companies have different methods of applying the grant funds to customer accounts. Staff is interested in how these methods differ and how the different methods correlate to other data metrics. Staff appreciates the hard work and collaboration of all the companies over the past year in ensuring that this working group was successful and the energy customers in Maryland are provided with the resources that they need. I will now hand things back over to Staff Counsel Mackerlane.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. We could go to the next slide, please. And at this point in time, it's a good time to draw some attention to exhibit number 1 on page 5 of the errata filing. Additional text has been deleted, and that deletion is not visible from the filing, but is an important part of the filing. And that text would read section, so it would be under 20.31.05.08 C. There's language under 3, which is an election is for one time only, and for subsequent benefits, the MEAP benefit may not be used to reduce arrearages. And this should show on the text as deleted. We would like to delete this sentence. So I just like to make that clear, and staff will file an errata showing this deletion. And at this time, staff respectfully requests the commission eliminate the waiver requirement of COMAR 20.31.05.08 C3, allow MEAP benefits to be applied to arrearages in a lump sum, and instruct the utilities to answer the staff's MEAP data request. Thank you for attention to staff's proposal, and this time discussion is open for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mackerlane. The item that regulation that you just mentioned striking, which is 8C3, that's the main event here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I believe that's actually the caption of this proceeding. Thank you. We'll turn to, we'll come back to you with questions. We'll see if any of the other parties today have questions or concerns. Hearing none, thanks staff for filing these proposed regulations on New Year's Eve. This has been a perennial subject before the commission. I've stated before that I think we may have too many low-income programs operating simultaneously in the state, and it may be time to revisit and streamline them. Both the MEAP and the USPP are well-intentioned, but over the years they've grown up in different directions, similar to trees into power lines, and we now have to permanently make this fix. So I do appreciate it. I don't have any substantive questions, but Ms. McElwain, you did mention two non-consensus items that the work group is still working through. Are you requesting any guidance from the commission today, or do the parties wish to argue those two items for the benefit of the work group, or are these matters that you are handling offline?
I think that these are matters that the work group is handling offline, and if the work group may need to have more work group meetings to discuss those items because consensus was not reached at this time. And we didn't want to delay reaching consensus on the issues that the group agreed on.
Okay, thank you. And I am glad there are consensus on the proposed regulations that are before us today. Ms. McElwain, just for the purpose, when I get around at the end of today to review the regulations, my notes have it that you've made some modifications, some of them relatively minor, to regulations 1, 5, 7, 8, and 9. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And if I could just turn to the other parties in terms of the non-consensus items, any discussion there? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Kane.
Yes, Chairman, we don't have any discussion on the non-consensus items, but we do have a comment regarding the filing of the DR. It seems like staff is saying that I guess the DR should be due in September, and looking at the statute, that's not necessarily the case.
I believe staff's making modification to move the deadline. Is that correct, Ms. McElwain?
Yes, but I believe that the deadline is moved from May 1st to September 1st.
Mr. Kane, does that resolve your concern?
No, I guess our concern is that I guess the statute that the statute indicates that that's when staff's report is due to the General Assembly, not necessarily the reports from the utilities.
I understand. I know we have a number of bills before the legislature right now to move some reporting dates. I don't recall if USPP was one of them. Ms. McElwain, do you have a response?
Yes, I believe the working group discussed this, and then we had reached consensus because this provided them some time to collect data after the heating season that we were requesting. So I think this was an item that we discussed. I think it's a reasonable request.
Mr. Kane, if it's a statutory deadline that you're worried about, and it's the commission's responsibility to go ahead and file that report, that's something we'll have to seek on our end, whether we necessitate a waiver with the General Assembly, or if the commission ultimately needs to request a change to the statute. But I appreciate your flagging that for us. Anything related or additional?
Mr. Chairman, as well, staff would just like to note that these DRs are, in addition to the other data requests that are required. This is just a focus on understanding MEP application and arrearages.
No, I understand that. I think Mr. Kane was more concerned about the statute, not the regs.
Mr. Chairman, this data request is not tied to the USPP report. It's separate from that. So we set the deadline with the utility. It's not being stated in the regulations. It's separate.
Mr. Kane, does this discussion satisfy any of your concerns? We might have lost Mr. Kane. Okay, I turn to my colleagues. Commissioner Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question of the utilities. Particularly question number 8 seems to be a very detailed question. Is this data request going to have a significant price tag on it? And if so, have you thought about that, or is this just something that you're able to comply with without a significant price tag. Why don't we start with Washington Gas, since he's already spoken up? Mr. Kane, can you respond?
Hi, we don't have any response at this time on that.
Anyone else? Mr. Trout?
Commissioner Herman, thank you. We looked at these data requests. They are extensive. They do require, in some instances, tracking data that had not been tracked before. We don't believe that the cost of doing that is going to be particularly onerous. What may take some time to do is to set up the tracking. So, for example, the first year we may not have complete data, but we assume that staff will be satisfied with what data we are able to assemble. Different utilities, it's my understanding, at the risk of speaking on behalf of some of my colleagues, that some of the other utilities will have some issues assembling some of this data. And again, assuming that staff works with us, as they have repeatedly on many issues in the past, with what we have, we giving them what we have, and we acting in good faith to try to get more the next time around. We think we can comply with this. That Ms. Harris and Ms. McElleen are right in pointing out that these are additives to extensive data requests that we already receive annually. So yeah, it's more of a burden, but it's what staff wanted, and we figure the extent of what staff asked for is a matter between them and you, as opposed to between them and us. We're just here to answer the questions.
Can I follow up on that, Mr. Chairman, if Commissioner Herman is done? I got a sense, I guess I'll ask staff, that staff was asking the commission to order compliance with these DRs, or with the DR. So do we need to order them to provide the information? I got a sense in the filing that that's what you're requesting us to do. And does that connote some type of reluctance on the part of the utilities to provide such information, if that's so?
I think it's always helpful to have a directive from the commission to support this DR and taking it seriously. This information, this DR has been requested previously, and we're looking for more information to understand how profiles of arrears in the MEEP grant actually work. And to answer some of these questions and to find the best path forward, we just need to continue analyzing the information.
Commissioner, I'll just note that the statute requires us to answer data requests promulgated by the staff. You don't need to issue an order for us to answer data requests. The General Assembly already did that many years or even decades ago. So, and we do provide information on a myriad of subjects when it's requested by staff, and we will continue to do so.
I understand that, Mr. Trout, but sometimes we get requests to compel parties in contested proceedings, for sure, to reply.
Yeah, and to be fair, there's a distinction between the data requests that are made in a contested proceeding and informational data collection by the staff. And when I was referring to the statute and the directive in the statute, that refers to informational data collection by the staff on behalf of the commission.
I appreciate that, but, and I do appreciate the distinction, but it gets back to my original question, which is they're asking us to compel you to reply through an order. And I wondered what that means. And like, is there some reluctance on the part of some utilities or some parties to provide this information in good faith? That's what I'm trying to get to the nub of.
Okay, so one, it is not my understanding that there is any reluctance by any of the utilities to provide any of the information that they have. And two, the staff phrased its request as a request for an order. And if pushed, I will say I disagree with the need. I disagree with how staff phrased their request there, and I disagree that an order is needed. And I found that to be a little excessive, but I'm trying not to rock the boat here because we have achieved consensus on an issue that I and others have been concerned about for a number of years now, and I don't want to derail that.
I appreciate that, and consensus is always good when it can be achieved. But I think your previous discussion about we'll give you what we have reasonably and there'll be several iterations is kind of making me think there's something going on here that I may not be very clear to me what's really going on here.
All right. Well, Potomac, I will just speak for Potomac Edison. Potomac Edison intends to provide the information requested by staff, and I will leave it at that.
Then there, let's go utility by utility. I will ask the utilities to respond to my question. Since you're only speaking for yours, I want to hear BG&E, I want to hear Washington Gas, I want to hear SMECO if they're on, I want to hear the PHI companies if they're on, please.
Well, good morning, Commissioner O'Donnell. Speaking for the PHI companies, we have every intention of complying with staff's data request.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, Mr. Seegers, while you're there, I'm gonna add on to, while you're responding to that question, respond to the question about if there's a significant cost associated with that response.
Absolutely, Commissioner, and I apologize for the delayed response. I was checking internally as the discussion was occurring. Speaking for the PHI utilities, while there may be a relatively minor incremental cost, we don't believe that it's going to be of any magnitude that would be of concern. Essentially, what we would need to do is just modify the queries that we run in order to respond to the data request. But once that's done, we anticipate being able to use the same query over and over again.
Hi, Commissioners. This is Robert Kane from Washington Gas. We echo the same sentiment as Potomac Edison, as well as Pepco and Exelon. We're not reluctant at all to answer or respond to any of these DRs. And additionally, in response to Commissioner Herman's previous question, we do not foresee that there's going to be a huge expense in answering these DRs.
Good morning, Commissioners. Speaking for BGE, we also have no concern with providing the data request as requested. In terms of our the costs, we don't think there's going to be any substantial cost to provide the data request responses. There may be an initial lift to provide the query, but then we should be able to do so annually.
Is SMECO on the line? All right. All right, very good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. At least we have on the record.
Thank you. And just to be clear, Ms. McElwain, this data collected by the utilities is due on September 1st of this year, starting this year?
Yes.
And does that run in perpetuity, or is there a sunset?
We don't have an end date at this time, but the point of the data is to collect it to better understand their arrearage, the application of the MEEP grant to arrearages. So I think once understanding can be found from the data, then there'll be no need to continue the data request. But at this time, it's in perpetuity.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Linton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions for the staff, and I'll initially first I'll echo the comments raised by Commissioner O'Donnell and Commissioner Herman regarding cost and the perception of a need to negotiate what the data required and received would be. So I appreciate that Commissioner O'Donnell has encouraged the companies to commit to providing this data, because that's where we shouldn't have to do that, but that's the way it should be. For our staff, I'm curious about two things. One, did the Office of Home Energy Programs participate at all in the work group discussions? Some of this data looks like it's data that they may be helpful in providing some information.
They did, and I've seen the data request.
Okay. All right. The second question has to do with the focus on the MEEP or LIHEAP money exclusively. I mean, one of the criticisms of the USPP program, and the chairman echoed it earlier this morning, is that it's outdated. It's been around for a long time, and so other programs, and more importantly, other money has become available. So of course we have the EUSP money that is sent to the customer through the same application as the LIHEAP application. There's also fluctuating, but RGGI funds are also made available to consumers as well. So I'm curious as to why the staff's data requests focus exclusively on the LIHEAP money only. Are we getting the USP data somewhere else, or is this, what's the rationale for that?
Catherine, I can answer. When this filing first came to staff over a year ago, we did focus pretty heavily on the USPP data side of things. And through that, we found out that, if I remember correctly, the companies do not have full access to USPP data. However, it does appear as though they are required to track MEEP data. So in creating this DR through this working group, we had to focus on the MEEP side of things simply because they weren't able to answer these questions that focused on USPP.
Okay. So I guess to the utility companies, when you receive a MEEP grant from OHEP as part of the energy assistance money that the company sends over, are you able to distinguish between the amount of the LIHEAP grant versus the amount of the EUSP grant versus the amount of any other money that OHEP might have sent over? Not all at once.
Good morning, Commissioner Linton. Speaking for the PHI utilities, I'm being told that yes, we cannot make that distinction. Sorry, yes, we can make that distinction.
Okay, good. So, all right, thank you. And I'll take the silence to mean that everybody else is in a similar situation. I had some concerns about a couple of.
This is David Kahn at BGE, and I was going to keep my video off just because I've had bandwidth problems in the past. Yeah, we also were able to distinguish between the MEEP grants, which, as you know, are primarily LIHEAP funded, versus the EUSP grants, which come from a variety of sources, the surcharge on customers' bills, as well as you've noted, oftentimes RGGI dollars as well. Our system is able to distinguish between those two separate grants.
Commissioner Linton, this is Robert Kane from Washington Gas. We only receive MEEP funds, so it wouldn't be a problem for us.
That's true. You might receive RGGI money. I don't know if it gets all taken by the electric side of your customer accounts, but that's fine. If that's all you get is LIHEAP, then that answers my question. It's actually easier for you. Okay. All right. Those are my only two questions. I appreciate staff and the work group for getting together and finally getting this done. This has been a long time coming, so I appreciate that from the administrative efficiency that it'll provide now. although I enjoy seeing everybody. You know, it doesn't make sense to show up every year for the same request. I am looking forward to the results of the staff's research and study, because the administrative request to remove the waiver component of this is important, but USPP as a whole, as staff has already mentioned, and even as the chairman has said, is a program that still has value and it needs to be updated. So I look forward to seeing how that turns out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have a question about the $400 arrearage threshold to participate. Did I hear you say that that was going to be eliminated? Either, I guess, staff?
No, that $400 limitation to participate is not going to be eliminated.
Oh, okay, so that still stands. How was that set? Where did that number come from? Is that in statute, or was that just something that a work group came up with?
I think the number is from a statute and has been developed depending on different levels of poverty and the way those are defined federally. But that threshold again still remains, and we did not change anything to do with that during this work group.
Okay, so I guess if it's a statute, then it needs to remain. But I was just curious if there had been any discussion as to whether that was the right amount. If that was maybe a question would be, are you aware of any potential participants being turned away because they could not achieve that $400 threshold?
Yeah, that's part of the reason why it's beneficial to customers to allow MEEP grants to be applied post the first year application process, because then they can pay down that $400 arrearage with the MEEP grant going forward.
Okay, but am I understanding the program correctly that before one can participate in the program, they have to be able to pay down their arrearages to that $400 level?
Yes,
So,
or
okay.
if they're on a payment plan, which USPP helps customers participate in a payment plan, it'll be that $400 or whatever the amount is required by the payment plan that they may be on.
Okay, so the $400 level hasn't been a barrier then to participation in the program, to your knowledge?
Right. I think it is a barrier to the program. I think it's possible that depending on different outcomes that you want, you could increase that barrier or you could reduce it. But that again will have lots of different consequences that would need more discussion.
Okay, I was just interested to know if that was the right level, or if we need to make sure that people are not being turned away from the program because the level is too high. I guess that's what I was trying to get at, and if there had been any discussion around that topic.
I think part of the data quest is to figure out how many customers continue to have arrearages and to figure out the number of those arrearages. And that will help us understand if that $400 threshold is too high, and if arrearages are too high, they can't be paid by the grant.
Okay, well, very good. Yeah, I strongly support your request to get that data, so I join my colleagues in that support. I also want to understand I guess there is a $40 minimum payment requirement. Does that still stand in order for one to continue to participate in the program?
I believe we struck that part of the regulations because it was from 1988 and it just seemed dated.
Okay, so do I understand now that as long as any payment is being made, participant can continue in the program?
I believe so, but I'd like to check, subject to check.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for those answers, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I may add some supplemental information, the 400 threshold was implemented back in the 70s or 80s. and has not been updated since. So if you adjust for inflation, that should be closer, if I remember correctly, to between $700 and $800. And I apologize, I misspoke in my comments when I said that we were proposing to eliminate that threshold.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, thank you for that additional information. At least from my perspective, I would encourage the work group and staff to take a hard look at the $400, make sure we're not excluding people from the program. And so again, I'm strong support of your request for information so that you can come back with such a potential proposal in the future.
Commissioner Herman.
Yeah, I guess this is a question for staff. I have a little bit of concern. Are we at the Public Service Commission potentially taking on some of OHEP's role in analyzing use of the MEAP funds? Because you're asking for all this data so that you can determine how MEAP is used, and I'm trying to understand the intersection between us and OHEP and why effectively, and maybe this isn't really OHEP's request, and OHEP is looking to see how MEAP funds are used and that sort of thing. And I just don't want to cross over the line, if you would, with respect to what belongs to us and what is our jurisdictional responsibility and what is housed at OHEP. So if y'all could help me out a little bit, because I feel like we're potentially skirting a line, and I want to make sure we stay on, I'll use another analogy, stay in our lane. So thanks.
OHEP was a participant in all of our meetings and has been aware of this request and was in support of it. And I think we're working together with understanding how MEAP is administered, and they do a lot of the, administering the funds, and we're just trying to understand the impact of administering the funds.
Yeah, and that's kind of where my question lies, because when you look in the statute, I believe that MEAP is an OHEP program, not a PSC program. Universal service is we're supposed to collect, and then the statute tells us, or not we, utilities, it's in our statute to have the utilities collect universal service and that, but MEAP is really potentially in OHEP's lane. So I'm trying to understand, how much of this belongs to us and how much of this belongs to OHEP.
That is an excellent question, Commissioner. I think this also does fall under our jurisdiction of, terminations and just implementing the statute to make sure that there's no unneeded terminations. So I see jurisdiction for the PSC there. If you'd like me to follow up with a further analysis, I'm happy to do so.
Mr. Chairman, may I add a note about this? Again, David Kahn at BGE.
You may.
So when OHEP calculates grant amounts under the MEAP program, it does not take into account the level of arrearage that a customer has when they're applying at that point. Now, the arrearage is relevant to when OHEP is calculating one of its two arrearage grants, the electric or the gas arrearage grants. But its formula for, and I apologize for speaking on behalf of OHEP, but I don't know that they're on the call, but its formula for calculating a MEAP grant is based upon the customer's income, household income level, the annual usage, which obviously translates into the annual cost, a few other factors, but not the arrearage. And so when a MEAP grant is awarded, it's up to the utilities then at that point to determine how to apply those funds. And as you've seen, each year we've come in and asked for a waiver from this item in COMAR that would otherwise prevent us from applying those funds to the oldest charges, except for that first year. And you've seen fit to grant the waiver every year. But I do want to clarify that it should not have any impact on how OHEP administers the MEAP grants themselves. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Khan. I wasn't really concerned. I think the waiver is in our lane for sure. The question is the data request, and then what the Public Service Commission can do with the responses and to the data request, and that's really, I don't want to. I appreciate everybody wanting to help and understand and best serve, the community that uses these funds. I get that. I just want to make sure that we're not taking on something that just isn't in our lane, and has our staff and everybody else doing a lot of work, but then to what effect? We could sort of recommend that OHEP do something with it, but they don't necessarily have to. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're not taking on something that we may not be able to, we may be able to help with assistance, but help with a recommendation, but we may not be able to order. We can't order OHEP to do certain things. So just trying to make sure that we're not inching over that line. That's really where I'm coming from.
Mr. Chairman, if Commissioner Herman is done, can I just ask a follow-up question to her question? I just want to be clear. We're talking today about the USPP, I guess it's called Universal Service Protection Program, and that program fully in our lane? That was my understanding. That's why I was asking some of the specific questions about the $400 and threshold. Either staff.
Universal Service Protection Program is a commission program.
Okay, so that is, to Commissioner Herman's concern. I just wanted to make sure that was correct. All right, that's all. So,
Mr. Chairman, follow-up discussion. I think these data requests are, which the utilities who are present all committed to providing, will inform the work group that we have, that we lead at the commission as to how all these programs fit together. And is that the intent of the data request and the information to be used in the context of the work group, to inform the work group?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure. So it's not necessarily a data request to spur specific action necessarily, as much as to inform the work group and how these programs all work together with regard to reducing arrearages and making sure that we have service programs working together where they are needed. Is that so or not?
Yes, the data requests are to collect information, not necessarily to direct any kind of action.
All right. Okay, thank you.
There's also a lot of overlap between the data that we're collecting through the DR as it pertains to MEEP and how that shows how USPP is functioning. For example, we ask about arrearages over time, as well as the number of customers who have an arrearage that is greater than the MEEP grant they receive, meaning that they'll still have an arrearage after they apply their entire MEEP grant. So if these are customers on USPP, then that may be indicative that the payment program isn't necessarily functioning as to help customers not rebuild arrears.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I, if this pandemic has taught us anything, is that arrearage management and the health, the financial health of our public service companies with respect to arrearages is tremendously important. And we need to have a full and robust understanding of those arrearages and how they impact the utilities. Thank you.
Mr. Richard.
Yeah, and just one other comment. I just wanted to applaud staff, for their work with OHEP because at least from my perspective, I see this as we're partners together. They have certain authorities and powers, and so do we. So I think together we do need to make sure that we're in sync and that we have that authority to require the utilities to provide the necessary information. I think we fully do that. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Seeing no additional questions, I would always remind the work groups and parties to these rulemaking proceedings that to the extent that the work group gets stuck on non-consensus items, the work group members, either staff or the parties, are free to petition the commission to convene and attempt to dislodge any disagreement or provide advice. At this point, I will present two motions. The first motion will be on the proposed regulations as amended, and the second motion will be with respect to the directive to have the utilities file the data request responses annually. So I move that the Commission publish the following proposed revisions to its existing regulations as filed by Commission staff in docket RM73 on December 31st, 2020, and as amended by its filing dated February 26th, 2021, and as further amended by the statements of Staff Counsel Mackerling today in the Maryland Register for notice and comment, subject to non-substantive changes necessary to conform to COMAR drafting requirements. Title 20, Subtitle 31, Chapter 5, Regulations 1, 5, 7, 8, and 9. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. That motion is approved. With respect to motion number 2, I move that the Commission direct the respective utilities to file data responsive to staff's 10 data requests as contained in Exhibit 2 of its December 31st, 2020 filing to be filed by September 1st on an annual basis. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
I'm going to vote nay, because I don't think that we need to order the utilities to do this. And I'm concerned that if some utilities can't get this data, they're under a subsequent order to provide it, and therefore might, if it costs somebody like Chop Tank, $100,000 to do it, that's a lot of money for Chop Tank. And so I'm concerned we don't necessarily have all the utilities here. So I think they will answer it, and I think that just like they have they provide the answers to the other staff data requests to which they are not ordered, I don't believe, to respond. So for that reason, I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't respond. I'm saying that it should be typical of any other data requests that we offer without an order to do so.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved. I would note that to the extent that utilities are unable or it is simply not possible to respond to data requests, the utility should petition the Commission explaining why it is unable to provide a response and or seek a waiver of this directive. Seeing no additional matters before the Commission in docket RM73 today's rulemaking session is now adjourned. We're off the record. Thank you.